Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
Joining a professional body has never been more important. Join thousands of other professionals just like you who are getting ahead with CIHT membership. Go to the CIHT website and discover exclusive resources and why the leaders and future leaders of the sector are members with CIHT.
This is a key moment for the future of our roads, against a challenging backdrop that includes legal requirement to meet net zero, high inflation, difficulties in delivering existing investment programs, and uncertainty about the future levels of demand. We focus today on the work of the Road Investment Scrutiny Panel. In January 2023, the panel published a report called Key Questions for Road Investment and Spending. Today, we explore these questions with Professor Lyons and Professor Steve Gooding from the panel. Welcome, I'm your host, Sara Zuin, and you're listening to Transport Talks from CIHT.
Hello, I'm Glenn Lyons. I'm the Mott MacDonald Professor of Future Mobility at the University of the West of England in Bristol.
Hi, I'm Steve Gooding. I am a visiting professor at the University of the West of England, and I'm the director of the RAC Foundation.
Thank you, Steve and Glenn, for being here this morning with me. First of all, I would like to ask you about the background of the Road Investment Scrutiny Panel. Why was there the necessity to create a forum to talk about these topics, and why now, in this particular moment?
A whole host of reasons, I think, why this seemed an important window of opportunity to bring a collection of voices and well-informed and experienced minds together to explore this. From a very personal point of view, I've been involved in the Wales Roads Review Panel, which itself has been invited by the Welsh Government to scrutinise, you might say, investment decisions and the process for investment for roads in Wales. And it begged the question, of course, what might we be thinking for England? When we turned attention to that, and of course, my journey connected up with Steve's on this, but there's a whole host of reasons, not just confined to England actually, for why this is an important moment to really look carefully, pause for thought, and not make hasty decisions that one might later regret and create false economies. Perhaps front and centre is an awareness that we have the road investment strategy process in England, and the third road investment strategy is under development, as indeed under review we have the National Networks National Policy Statement, a rather dry sounding title for a document, but essentially the strategic framework within which the Secretary of State makes decisions or is guided on decision making for nationally significant projects. That's of course emphasising national, but we're also focusing here on road investment in the Rand, covering the 190,000 miles of roads just in England. If you add to those two significant markers in terms of timing point, the general state of flux that we're facing in society, particularly here in England, in terms of having left the European Union, feeling the reverberations of the pandemic, including the financial pressures that are now being brought to bear on the public purse and on people's livelihoods. And then last but certainly not least are the twin emergencies of climate change and the depletion of biodiversity. And in fact, the government itself having been found wanting by the High Court when it comes to its net zero strategy. Add all those together, and it seemed to us really important as professionals that we stepped forward, put our minds together, and explored what we felt were some key concerns over future investment so that we can help decision makers. This is not about an assault on the decision making process, but very much aiming to be critical friends.
So one of the first sections of the report is about decarbonisation and specifically how we should look at new road investment schemes with a net zero target to be hit by 2050, which needs, of course, a fast-paced reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors, including transport. So how do we develop new road investment projects, especially road enhancement ones, while also complying with our decarbonisation targets?
That, of course, is the big question, but I'm going to, perhaps having spoken a lot, give Steve first go at this, and then I'll come back.
I think the issue that we surfaced in discussion around the panel table wasn't that all road enhancement was necessarily bad impossible to justify in the face of the climate emergency that Glenn has already referenced. It was that we couldn't really satisfy ourselves that it could be reconciled. So I would say, as somebody who has definitely supported things like the A14 scheme, a very, very major project taken forward by National Highways, I think the Caxton Gibbet to Black Cat scheme, again, very well-known scheme, recognises that we have stretches of national road network that are running way over design capacity, and it's right to find a solution to them of some sort. But by the same token, we've got to be able to see that there is a consistency between the way we're approaching the management, the enhancement, the development of the road network for the future, and our broader policy aims and commitments. Also, of course, I would say that whilst you've highlighted there the challenge we face when we're thinking about whether or not to add capacity to the network, point one, when we're adding perhaps to the strategic road network, we might be doing that as part of a broader package. If we're trying to take traffic away from a built-up area, for example, are we putting in the complementary measures that would mean in the round we might have smoother traffic flow and less exposure to harmful emissions, particularly I'm thinking about air quality there. But also, very importantly, transport investment, road investment isn't all about adding. A lot of that investment is needed to keep the national asset in good functioning order. And I think many of us have a concern, perhaps more about the local highways than about the national highways, that we've built the house and we're spending all of our time arguing about whether to build a conservatory on the side, and we're not spending enough time making sure the roof doesn't leak.
And I think from what Steve has said there, consistency is a key issue, as is coherence. So on the one hand, capacity enhancement schemes are the most emotive aspect of road investment, where very strong views are held, differing views. But we need to remind ourselves from a decarbonisation point of view, it's the entire asset and its use which is really contributing substantially to emissions. Nevertheless, when we come to both of those, capacity enhancement and the existing road network, a critical unaddressed question at the moment is whether or not it's prudent to go forwards on an assumption we can accommodate more traffic growth, as opposed to recognising the potential necessity, or at least well-advised approach, to aim for some reduction in road traffic levels in order to meet our interim carbon budgets, which are as critical in terms of the remaining carbon we're able to emit to remain within limits, as it is looking ahead to 2050. And at this point, that isn't clear. What we have are capacity enhancement schemes essentially predicated in terms of the appraisal process and the underlying analysis on projections of road traffic growth, which then make the case, the economic case, if they're indeed capacity enhancement to accommodate more traffic, there are other reasons for investing in capacity enhancement, then it raises this question again of consistency. How can that be consistent with a legally compliant approach to achieving a net zero strategy? And this is really what we've tried to bring to the fore in our report, that we need more clarity. And there have been various voices pointing to that question of a clear signal from government about what it commits to in terms of future traffic levels that would convince the High Court and probably, frankly, many in the profession that we have a coherent, credible and consistent strategy for road investment.
How do we support a diverse and inclusive approach to making the right decisions for future road investments? What voices should be heard in this process?
That's, I think, it can feel a rather soft and peripheral question in some people's minds, but actually when we come to the whole process of road investment, indeed establishing a third road investment strategy, at the heart of all of this is human judgment. There are no laws of physics or decrees handed down by God about exactly how a process should be followed and decisions made on road investment. So of course, as soon as one says judgment, it raises the question of who's making the judgment, and indeed who is scrutinising the judgment made by the judges. And it's reasonable to raise the question when we look at the road investment history about the makeup of voices, experience and mindsets that come into that judgment process. And just simply, as our report highlights, the diversity of issues from decarbonisation to biodiversity to social outcomes to maintenance, as well as the economy. And one quickly realises that if there's a dearth of diversity in the conversation, in the decision making, there's a real risk that the robustness of our decisions aren't meeting the standards we should expect for stewardship of the future.
I think there's a challenge, isn't there, across all aspects of public policy to try to ensure that one's getting all of the relevant perspectives and hearing all of the relevant voices. On this call today, you have, let's face it, two white men, early to mid-career. You can't see us, so you'll just have to imagine. I think of a young Tom Cruise in my case, but who are very conscious that we're not necessarily mixing with everybody out there who's a customer of the road network or as a user. Perhaps the voice that we were most conscious of in the conversation around the panel is the voice of the future. So it's the decisions that we take about our transport infrastructure aren't with us for decades, they're with us for centuries. So we need to be involving people and thinking way ahead where we are, which is what transport appraisal tries to do. And again, what the panel was saying was perhaps we need to broaden our thinking. Perhaps if we're not hearing all of those voices, more needs to be done to bring them in. Of course, we aren't underestimating the fact that is a challenge. And frankly, we're up for ideas.
How much is in this process lived experience important versus technical experience?
That's a very good question. And I think the two are inseparable. In fact, and this will be purely anecdotal, but I think it's borne out that you will find stories about senior decision makers where it was a conversation with a nephew or niece at the weekend who was complaining about the education system that led the minister to decide that actually they would change direction in this way because it felt right and proper. And of course, there you've got a strong influence of lived experience coming in either to challenge or reinforce technical experience. The reality of road investment is that it is an emotive topic. There aren't always rights and wrongs. There are judgments. I'm a motorist. I've made good use in my career of the strategic road network. So I'm not speaking from a perspective of someone who loathes the very idea of roads existing. My life has been dependent on roads nationally and locally. And so in a sense, of course, I can't leave behind my own lived experience when I come to the conversation, but I'm also very aware of the dangers of unconscious biases, which is why you need this diversity of views and why I think our Road Investment Scrutiny Panel was so effective, because we were honest and challenging with each other, and therefore brought into good balance any differences brought by personal experience as opposed to our technical competencies.
Experience is, of course, important. We need to learn from what we've done before. We need to learn from what we've seen and experienced directly before. I would say the key thing for us is to always be conscious of the limitations of experience, because experience is great. If one's working in technical engineering, understanding what worked and what didn't when you're building a bridge, really rather important. But experience only gets you so far if, as in this case, I think, we collectively want the future to be different to the past that we've experienced, ideally better.
Thinking about the government's objective of levelling up and improving local economies, how should road schemes be thought about to ensure that they can deliver economic development to those lagging behind regions?
Key thing in the way that question comes across, how should road schemes be thought about, I would say, is let's not think about road schemes in isolation. Don't start with thinking about the road scheme. Start thinking about what are we trying to achieve in this particular place? What is going to help this particular place thrive, make it attractive as a place to live, as a place to work, as a place to site your business? If Having thought about that, having thought about the accessibility requirements, about how people and stuff are going to move around, there's something to be done to the road network or to transport accessibility, that's the way round we've got to get to be thinking. I suspect many would think that we sit here in places like the RAC Foundation or even at the university out in Bristol, and we get the roadmap out and we think, what are we going to do to promote this place or that place, and why don't we upgrade this road? Actually, that's the wrong way round. Start with what we're trying to achieve, and what we're trying to achieve almost exclusively is not about a road and traffic. It's about how we want a place to be and how we want it to work.
Absolutely, Steve. I completely agree with your kind of calling out, in a sense. I don't mind the question itself, and I think it should at least be, what should we be doing in terms of road investment to help address levelling up? But actually, of course, one could pare that back even further and say, what should we be doing with investment to help levelling up? Because adding road schemes starts to narrow down the notion of consideration of alternatives, and it is about access. But certainly when I hear levelling up and road investment, what is conjured up for me is a sort of imagined road network where these gods are now moving the lines of the network around to level up the playing field of access by road. And of course, the public purse simply doesn't provide for unfettered continuation of capacity enhancement around the country to level up in that particular notion of levelling up. But also, one might say two wrongs can't make a right. We can't level up parts of the country which may have insufficient access by providing access in the way we've always done and getting what we've always got. This is an opportunity to step back and seriously consider the range of options we have in a digitalizing economy and society, with, frankly, the much more evident pressures of the climate emergency. So in that context, yes, I think it's absolutely investment as opposed to road investment, and certainly road investment rather than road scheme investment at the heart of the question.
How do we address future uncertainty over a long period of time? If we think, for example, about the strategic road investment strategies, they span throughout a period of 5 years, and a lot can change in such a period. So how do we account and prepare for changes that we cannot forecast with certainty?
Uncomfortably, to start with. So in historic terms, we have either been much more confident about the future, or we have been comfortable in concealing the uncertainty in some of the assumptions we've made. So in appraisal terms, we have the notion of road traffic forecasts, which for many years used the terminology of a central projection around which there was some sensitivity, which essentially sent a signal out to the sector that said, the government has shown you that the forecast future traffic levels against which you should now provide in response to the prediction are as follows. Now, in a very positive way, the Department for Transport and others very well recognise now that the uncertainty is much greater than it has been in the past, and therefore, if we want to have robust decision making, we have to respond to that. So we have seen the publication of a set of what are known as common analytical scenarios, which are an attempt by the department to set out a range of possible futures that you might say are before we undertake to do anything more in terms of trying to influence that future. Now, inevitably, that invites questions forward from myself, Steve, and others about, would we have chosen that set of possible futures? One of the challenges with that set is that none of them reflect a reduction in road traffic. None of them seriously reflect the very, very serious consequences of climate change that might be unfolding for us in the UK as much as elsewhere in the decades to come. But at the heart of responding to your question is an accommodation of that uncertainty rather than a concealing of it because it's too uncomfortable. And this is about taking, if you like, a least regrets approach, which says what we want is to make investments which we know or have sufficient confidence are sound investments, irrespective of the way the world will change beyond our control in future. But of course, we do have a degree of control, and it's that control we have to bring to bear on the imperative of reaching a future that is net zero.
I think that the issue of looking into the future is always a very tricky one. To reduce it, the temptation is to reduce it to a bumper sticker, so I will, because I think that the only true 2020 vision is hindsight, and the only thing we can say with absolute certainty about the future is that it hasn't happened yet. And I think that our ambition, I think our aspiration should be a no regrets approach. Tragically, I don't think humans are ever going to get there because the world is uncertain. There are some big potential shocks facing us over the next 50 years. Remember, we're talking in decades and beyond. So what I think we should do is to test our proposals, to test down to individual schemes, but also test programs and the overall sort of national impact of things against plausible scenarios. So to pick up on something Glenn was saying there, scenarios that involve a variety of things happening. And if all of these things happened, then where would we be? If all of those things happened, then where would we be? Then we come out with a balance of probabilities. Some things we are probably going to get wrong. We shouldn't brush that away, and we should try to avoid it. What we said in the panel is, hang on, we're not quite sure that at the moment we really are testing against that range of plausible future scenarios. If we could see that happening a bit more transparently, then we might be feeling a bit more comfortable about the decisions. But at the moment, the sense around the table, and I should stress a lot of this was about what's visible to people, is that there's a narrowing down into a single solution a bit too quickly, and then not enough testing of that against a range of plausible outcomes, which many of us might think are plausible but not that likely 20 years out, but we should at least stop and think about them.
And I think, Sarah, you can start to sense the tensions that are apparent within the sector right now in relation to the question you've posed, because different of us, in fact, as our colleague Phil Goodman has said in the past, remember that uncertainty is a state of mind about the future. I can quite legitimately say to Steve, I'm very clear about what's going to happen. That's my view, and I'll have that. Thank you. And Steve will say, well, good luck, because I'm deeply uncertain. Or Steve can be uncertain in a different way to me, which brings back the important question of who's involved in the judgment and who's scrutinising the judgments that are being made. Compounding that is a strong sense of, I would say, unconscious biases at play, not least the sunk cost fallacy, which is, we have a path dependency in the journey of road investment. We have a whole industry geared around that path of development. We have expectations from communities to companies and industry about what should be happening or could happen, and indeed pipelines of work coming forward. And it's very easy to allow sort of inertia to play out, and for that momentum to continue in the direction it has. It takes a very brave politician, or a politician faced with necessity in the face of adversity, to say, let's pause for a moment, let's reconsider the direction of travel we've got here, including some of the things we thought we were going to do. Are they still appropriate? Because uncertainty is a changing concept. It reflects our inability to understand cause and effect. But if we understand more, or we get signals about how change is happening, we should feed that back into the decision making without creating paralysis in the end, of course.
Okay, I'm done with questions, but I would just like you, if you would like to have a final message about the paper, a final statement that you would like to have us to wrap it all up.
I think for me, and you will have possibly seen it in other quarters, I'm very proud, first of all, that 8 professors, and in fact 9 of us, including Andrew Crudgington, our very competent and hardworking secretary, were able to come together, were willing to come together because of how strongly we felt about the importance of this topic. But these are individuals who are well respected in their own rights, have strong opinions, and opinions they will defend and justify. It wasn't a straightforward process for us to arrive at a conclusion that we shared together in a report. So please take seriously the fact that there is a strong degree of diversity, at least in terms of professional experience and expertise, in the set of people involved in this report. And therefore, I think it makes it all the more important, the messages that we're wanting to share with senior decision makers now.
The thing I would say about this report is that we very deliberately set out not to say, here are a set of conclusions, here is what you must do. That wasn't what we were about. I'd like people listening to this to think of the report as the start of a conversation. And if you're a member of the CIHT, it's a conversation that you should be getting involved with.
Joining a professional body has never been more important. Join thousands of other professionals just like you who are getting ahead with CIHT membership. Go to the CIHT website and discover exclusive resources and why the leaders and future leaders of the sector are members with CIHT.